So what are GUIs? GUI stands for Graphical User Interface, and they're basically objects that you can interact with inside Roblox. So think of any text buttons that you see on your screen or any type of text that you see in game, those are GUIs. So some examples of GUIs that you can see inside games might be like title effects that you have above your character or text buttons that you see on your screen that you can click on. All of those are types of GUIs. So when you make GUIs, you usually place them inside Starter GUI. So there are two main types of GUIs that you can make inside Roblox. So there's the in-game GUIs, so they're basically your title effects that you would have that's actually physically inside the game. And you'd also have screen GUIs that are only visible on your screen, so they don't actually exist inside the game. So to make the on-screen GUIs, all you have to do is go into Starter GUI and insert a screen GUI. And inside the screen GUI is where you would place your different GUI elements. So let's say I want to make a text label on screen. I would click this plus sign over here and I would search for text label and I could insert inside. And as you can see, it creates a text label on my screen. So it's not actually inside the game, it only exists on your screen. Now the stuff inside Starter GUI gets replicated to the player when the game starts. So whatever's inside Starter GUI is what the players will have on their screen. Now the second type of GUI that I was talking about was the actual in-game GUIs. So one example of that would be billboard GUIs. So to create a billboard GUI, you would just have to go inside the part you want a billboard GUI on, insert a billboard GUI, and then insert whatever text element you want inside. So I can insert a text label. So this text label exists inside the game. So it's not actually on the player's screen, it's physically inside the game itself. So those are two types of GUI elements inside Roblox. Okay, so now I'm going to go over different properties that GUI elements have. So I'm going to go back and insert that text label that we had from earlier, and we're going to go through some of the properties. So I'm just going to stick this in the middle. So if you click on the text label and open up the properties tab over here, you'll see that it has a whole bunch of properties. So let me just go through some of the major ones. So you can change the background color over here by clicking the color palette and changing the color. So this changes the background color. Very self-explanatory. Background transparency is a value between 0 and 1. 0 being completely opaque and 1 being completely transparent. So if I drag the slider over here to 0.5, you can see it's semi-transparent. And if I go to 1, it's completely transparent. Now border color is similar to background color, and it just changes the color of the outline around the GUI. And you can change the size of the border by increasing this number. So right now it has a border size of 0, so we can change that to like 10 to make a thicker border. And then you can change the color of the border. So let's make it red, for example. Another important property is its position. So you can change these numbers over here to change where the GUI is on the player's screen. You'll notice that there are two types of scaling. So there's the scale and there's the offset. Scaling basically uses numbers between 0 and 1 to determine the position of the GUI on your screen. So it's usually recommended to use scale rather than offset, because offset is basically using the amount of pixels on the screen. So let's say I set the scaling to 0, 0, and I want to change the offset to 100 in the x-axis and 100 in the y-axis. So what I've done here is basically moved the GUI element 100 pixels to the right and 100 pixels down. And the top left corner is basically where the reference point is. So 0, 0 would be in the top left corner. So since I've changed scaling to 100, 100, it's moved the GUI element 100 pixels to the right and 100 pixels down. The disadvantage with using offset is that different players have different screen sizes. So some people are playing on their computer and then maybe some people are playing on their phones. And the screen sizes are different. So on the laptop I'm using over here, 100 pixels to the right and 100 pixels down still looks like it's in the top left corner, but maybe on the phone it's actually all the way down here because the phone's screen is smaller, so it has less pixels on it. So if I moved it 100 pixels to the right and 100 pixels down, it would be in a different position. So like it might be all the way down here and the UI elements wouldn't be the same. So if you use the offset, that's a problem you might run into, which is why I recommend using scaling for the position. So I want to elaborate on the scaling system a bit. So let's say I change the scaling of the x-axis to 0.5 and change the scaling of the y-axis to 0.5. Basically what this has done is we've taken the top left corner of the GUI and we've moved it halfway to the right and halfway down. So this top left corner of the GUI will be exactly in the middle of the screen. Now if we go back up here to anchor point, you'll notice it says 0, 0. So what that means is when you're changing the positioning of the GUI, it will reference the top left corner. So when we set the GUI's position to 0.5, 0.5, it sets the top left corner to the center. But what if we want to change the middle to the center, so like it's dead in the middle? To do that, we can change the anchor point to 0.5, 0.5. So basically what that's done is when we're changing the position of the GUI, it will use the middle as the reference point. Alright, the next property I want to talk about is size. So right now, by default, Roblox uses the offset system to determine the size. So what that means is you can see the size is 0, 200, 0, 50. So what that means is it's 200 pixels wide and 50 pixels tall. Now the problem with that is that different devices have different screen sizes, like I've said before. So on a really small device, this GUI element, this text label over here might appear really massive because like let's say your phone was only 400 pixels wide, then this GUI element would take up half the screen, which is like really big, which is too big. So what we want to do instead is use the scaling system for sizing GUIs. So I can change the scale of X to 0.25, change the offset to 0, change the Y scale to 0.15, and change the Y offset to 0. So basically what we've done now is we're using the scaling system. So what that means is an X scale value of 0.25 means that the GUI takes up a quarter or 25% of the x-axis. So like if I were to stack this GUI over here, I could fit 4 of these along the horizontal over here. I can duplicate it really quickly just to show you. So that's 1. Actually, maybe I should remove the border first to illustrate my point. Alright, so that's 1, 2, 3, and 4. And a Y scaling of 0.15 basically means that it takes up 15% of the Y-axis. So I could fit in about 6 of these inside because 0.15, so 15% times 6 is 90%. So I could fit 6 and a little bit more. So I can demonstrate that really quickly. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, plus a little bit more. Another really important property is the visible tab. So it's a Boolean value, meaning it can only be true or false. So if you uncheck this box over here, it will make the visible value equal to false, meaning it'll just hide the GUI away. And if I check it again, it will make it appear. And then under text is where you can adjust the text that's displayed over here. So you can change the font So I can change it to something different. I can bold it. I can change the actual text itself by going under this text property and typing whatever I want. Or I can just change it by like double clicking on the UI element over here. I can change the text color. I can scale it. So I can scale the text to make it the appropriate size for the size of the GUI. Or I can manually change the text size to something I want. I can change the text stroke color, which is essentially just the outline for the text, just like the outline we had for the text label before. And you can change the transparency of the text as well. So if I change it to 0.55, you can see that the text is somewhat transparent. So that's pretty much all the important properties of GUI elements. So now I will go over all the different types of GUI elements. So if you go inside the plus button over here under Start GUI and go under GUI, you can see all the different types of GUI elements that you can insert. So I'll just go over some of them right now. So a frame is basically just a GUI object that is used as a container. So you put other GUI elements inside. So I can insert the frame here. I can size it however I want. And the purpose of the frame is usually to serve as a background. So a frame is good for a shop inside a game, for example. Like you can insert different GUI objects inside. So you can have a text label for the title. You can have different buttons for all the objects that you want players to buy, and so on. So I can quickly insert text labels inside just to show you. So I can insert a text label here. And maybe I'll just change the background of the frame so I can contrast it with the text label. So as you can see, you can insert different kinds of GUI elements inside. I can insert maybe a button as well and stick it right there. So one thing to note is when you're looking at the position or scaling of GUI elements that are inside other GUI elements, it's relative to the GUI element that your text labels and stuff are found inside of. So when I have the position set to 0, 0 for this text label, it's not the top left corner of the screen, it's the top left corner of the GUI element that the text label is inside. So in this case, since this text label is inside the frame, position 0, 0, 0, 0 would be in the top left corner of the frame. And when you change the sizing, so let me just remove the offset. Let's say I wanted to make the text label span the entire width. So that means it's a scaling of 1 because scale goes between 0 and 1. Let's say I wanted the text label to span half the height of the frame. So you'll notice that the text label scales within the frame itself. So a scale of 1 isn't the entire width of the screen, but rather it's the entire width of the frame. And same thing for the y-axis as well. So frames are good for putting other GUI elements inside. Alright, so since I was talking about text buttons before, I will elaborate on it now. So text buttons are basically the same thing as text labels. You can customize it all the same way. The only thing is that it has events associated with it, which can detect when a player clicks on it or hovers on it or just interacts with it in any way. So that makes it a little special. So if you want to make like an equip button or a shop button, you would use a text button and not a text label. Alright, so image labels and image buttons are pretty much the same thing to text labels and text buttons, except instead of having text that's displayed, you have images that are displayed. So by default, you have this regular blank template for an image, but you can change that to whatever you want. So you can go inside the properties of either one of the GUI elements and you can go down to image. Now I'm not sure why it's not letting me change the image, but maybe because I have to publish the place first, so let me just do that. I can go to File, Publish the Roblox, and then click Create. Alright, so let me go back to starter GUI and go back to this image label over here. And yep, okay. So it wasn't letting me add an image before for some reason, but I think it was because I haven't published the game to Roblox. So be sure to publish the game before Roblox before trying to change the image. Otherwise, I don't think it will work. So you can go, like I said before, you can go under File and then Publish to Roblox. So you can then go to either the image button or image label, go down to its properties under Image, and go to Image and click on the text, which will open up this little menu over here, and you can click Add Image. It'll basically prompt another window to open up, and you can choose file from your computer to add the image inside. And it should name itself. You can name it whatever you want and then click Create. And it should update the image element to that image that you wanted. Alright, so the next GUI element I want to talk about is a scrolling frame. So it works similar to a frame, except it has an option where you can scroll down on stuff. So if you had like a bunch of items in a shop, for example, and you couldn't fit them all on one frame, you can use a scrolling frame instead, because you can just scroll down and you can have much more items inside. So to demonstrate, I'm just going to insert a whole bunch of text buttons over here just to show you that the scrolling works. And you'll see that it's kind of weirdly formatted for some reason. And scrolling frames are kind of funny like that. So you can see you can scroll down and access UI elements that are further down. So you can kind of fit like a whole bunch inside. So you'll notice it's all really messy and it kind of like glitches when you're trying to move elements inside. One thing I've learned is that you can insert other types of UI elements inside. So you can go inside the scrolling frame and add what's called a UI list layout. It'll basically sort everything inside for you. See, look, now all the buttons are neatly organized over here. And you can also sort how they're displayed. So I can change the horizontal alignment to maybe the center. So now items are displayed in the middle. You can even sort how the elements are displayed. So you can sort it in layout order or alphabetically. And you can change the padding, which is basically the space between each element. So maybe I add an offset of 10. Now they're all slightly spaced out. It's hard to see because it's a white background on a white scrolling frame, but you can see it change. So I'm going to change it to 20, and now they're slightly more spaced out. Yeah, so scrolling frames are really useful if you have a lot of different items that you want to display and can't fit them all onto the screen. So a text box is slightly different. Similar to a text label, it has text that can be displayed on the GUI element. But the text box is slightly different in that it actually takes input from the player. So when the player's in the game, they can actually type stuff inside the text box. And there are events associated with the text box that allow you to extract what the player has written as input. Alright, and then there are the two different types of in-game GUIs. So you got surface GUIs and you got billboard GUIs. So to demonstrate, I'm just going to insert a part in workspace. I'm just going to make it a little bigger. Alright, so the first one I've already demonstrated. The first one I'm going to show you is the billboard GUI. So to create a billboard GUI, we can just go and set the part you want the GUI to be inside of, and then insert a billboard GUI from there. Now, there isn't really anything you can see inside, so it's kind of like a container, like a frame, in that you can put other GUI elements inside. So I can insert a text label inside this billboard GUI. Now you can see it just barely, but because the part is blocking it. So the billboard GUI has several properties. So you can make the billboard GUI bigger through scaling or offset, but you can also change where it's positioned. So I use this property called stud offset, and it basically changes the position of the billboard GUI relative to the part that it's found inside. So I can change it to 0, 3, 0, which basically offsets it by 3 studs up. So now it appears above the part. Instead of putting it inside the part, you can also set the adornee property to the part itself. So you can just select the empty value beside adornee and then select the part you want it attached to. So if I change the adornee to the spawn location, it'll appear over there, even though it's inside the part. So you can just set the adornee to the part that you want it inside of. And then there are a few properties that are pretty self-explanatory. Max distance is basically the maximum distance at which it'll render. By default, it's infinity, but I can change it so maybe it hides itself after 20 studs. So if I get 20 studs away from the part, it will hide itself. So it won't be visible to me anymore. And if I go back in, it's visible again. So the second type of in-game GUI is a surface GUI. So to add a surface GUI, you can just go to the part that you want the surface GUI to be inside of, and then insert it. Now, just like the billboard GUI, the surface GUI is more like a container. So you would have to insert other UI elements inside for it to be visible. So I'm just going to insert a text label, and it should be visible. So the label is off to the side over here. Now that's because if you go inside the surface GUI's properties, you'll see that it has a property called face, and it's basically where the surface GUI will be displayed. So right now it's set on the front. That means this side over here is the front side. To change it, I'll go inside and select the face I want the surface GUI to appear on. So I want it to appear on the top side. So if I select top, the GUI will appear at the top. And similarly to billboard GUIs, you can set an adornee to the surface GUIs. So you can set the adornee to the part that you want the surface GUI to appear on. So that way, the surface GUI doesn't necessarily have to be inside the part for it to appear on the part. So from there, you can modify the GUI elements inside to however you want. Like I can change the text and have it display whatever I want. So it acts like a regular text label, except it's not on the player's screen, it's actually inside the game. So now we're going to talk about how you can script GUIs. So the first thing I'm going to make is a button that allows you to open and close a frame. So I'm going to go inside Start GUI and make sure you insert a screen GUI if you haven't already, and I'm going to insert a text button inside. So I'm just going to place the text button over here. I'll have text on it that says open. I'll rename the name of the text button to open. And I'm going to have a frame. And I'm going to make it bigger. And then I'm going to hide it to begin with. So I'm going to go under the frames property, under visible, and uncheck that box. And I'll just call the frame shot. So we're going to pretend it's a shot. So what you can do now is you can go inside the open button and insert a local script. So the first thing you want to get is the button. So you can do local open button equals script.parent. Script.parent because the parent of the local script is the button. And then get the shot frame. So local shot frame equals script.parent.parent.shot. So buttons and text buttons in general have an event that fires when a user clicks on it. So you can do open button dot mouse button one up, connect function, and then enter. The first thing we want to check is if the shot is visible. So if it's visible, we want to close it. And if it's not visible, we want to open it. So we can do if shotFrame.visible equals true, then shotFrame.visible equals false. So if the shot frame was already open and then they click the button off to the side, we want to close the shot. But if the shot was hidden to begin with, we want to open it when they click the button. So we'll add an else. So if the shot frame was not visible to begin with, we want to open it. So we can do shotFrame.visible equals true. So I'm going to hit play and we'll see if this code works. So there's the open button over here. So this mouse button one up event will fire when I left click and then release. That's what the up part is. So like when I let go of my left click is when this event will fire. So I'm going to click and it opens the frame. And I'm going to click again and it'll hide the frame. And you can notice it only fires when I release the mouse. So right now I'm pressing down and holding, but I haven't let go yet. So the event hasn't fired. So when I let go, the frame should appear in 3, 2, 1. So last thing I'm going to show you is how you can tween GUIs. So tweening is basically something that allows you to transition smoothly from one state to another. So you can tween parts inside Roblox Studio, but you can also tween GUIs. So maybe you sometimes see smooth transitions, so smooth movement of parts inside some games. So like when a part moves smoothly from one point to another point, you can do something similar with GUIs. So I'm going to insert a text label that I'm going to tween. So there are different properties that you can tween, but what I'm going to do for this example is I'm going to tween its size. So right now the GUI is kind of small. So let me just switch the scaling system over to scale rather than offset. So I'm going to set it to 0.20, 0.20. So to tween this text label, I'm going to insert a local script inside. And I've pre-written this code here to save some time, and I'll quickly go over what it means. So the first thing we do is we access the tween service, which is what we'll need in order to tween this GUI object. Now I'm going to assign a variable called object to this text label that we're going to tween. I'm going to set a target size. So this is the size I want it to become after the tween. So right now it only occupies 0.2, so which is 1/5 of the x-axis and 1/5 of the y-axis. But by the end of it, I want it to occupy 3/4 of the screen. And I'm going to create a new tween info, and this basically tells them how long the tween is going to last. And I'm going to create the tween by doing tween service create with the parameters taking in the object, the tween info, and then the new size that we'll have after the tween. And the last thing we're going to do is play the tween. Oh, but one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to wait 2 seconds just in case the game loads too quickly for me to capture it. The code is pretty simple and we will run it right now. So nothing, and then it gets bigger. Let me run that again. Though maybe let me just move it off to the side over here. So it'll wait 2 seconds and then it will smoothly transition over. So we've covered what GUIs are. We've covered much of the properties that GUIs have. We talked about what each GUI does. And now we've scripted with GUIs. So hopefully if you've gotten to this point over here, you have a basic understanding of how GUIs work inside of Roblox. If you guys got any questions about the tutorial or anything else, you can leave a comment down below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.